Welcome to the Ancestral of Entrepreneurship and Regional Development podcast. Each publication in our journal is a great opportunity to share significant and audacious contributions to a larger group. My guest today is Sebastian Barros from the Universidad de Católica de la Santísima Concepción in Chile. He recently published an article entitled Summons from the Past, Spiritual Calling in Indigenous Entrepreneurship. It has been published in Entrepreneurship and Regional Development, a journal edited by Taylor & Friends. Sebastian, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here.
Can you tell us, what is the origin of your paper? Why have you decided to address this particular topic? And what is the question you have to answer?
Okay, this project really began during the tail end of my PhD. I was on a 6-month research visit at Durham University Business School, finishing up my thesis. And as I was rereading the interviews and conversations I had conducted with several Mapuche entrepreneurs, a Chilean indigenous group, I kept finding stories I hadn't fully used. A lot of things kept emerging. So these weren't just stories about making products or finding customers. They referred to ancestors, lands, spirituality. People described very strong and ongoing pull from the past that shaped what they built throughout their ventures and why. So that kept nagging at me because most entrepreneurship research assumes that people look forward. I don't know, at market, growth, innovation outcomes. These voices were not future only. They were pulling entrepreneurs backward in time and asking them to bring something old into the present and project it forward into the future. So as I'm telling you, this project grew from those interviews and conversations and a simple curiosity of mine. What if that pull, what they describe as a summons from their ancestor, actually changes the way entrepreneurship works? I wanted to listen closely and let the patterns emerge rather than force a theory or, I don't know, my own preconceptions or the theme of my thesis. The exploratory question I set was very straightforward. How does this spiritual ancestral calling influence entrepreneurship among indigenous people? So I wasn't trying to prove a hypothesis. I just wanted to understand. So I felt a duty, like a personal duty, to do this very carefully. So I took a lot of time, 3 years actually, from beginning to end. I double-checked my interpretations and kept going back to the transcriptions and notes until something coherent emerged. That's the beginning of this project.
What are the main contributions of your paper?
Thank you for your question, Vincent. If I have to sum it up, I would say there are 3 main contributions. At an empirical level, this paper centers Mapuche voices and documents how the Mapuche entrepreneurs describe being moved by an ancestral summons. This shapes in many ways how they engage and persist in venturing, what those ventures look like, and what goals are set. Okay. Secondly, at a conceptual level, I unpack the ancestral summons into 3 specific mechanisms, let's say: recalling, engaging, and assessing. The first one, recalling, is the way the past provides ideas and inspirations to engage in entrepreneurship. Individuals pull on traditional ecological knowledge and memories to form business ideas. Okay, engaging is the work of bringing those traces into the present, creating products, services, or practice that in some shape or form revive this old knowledge. And finally, assessing is the way that they measure whether or not a path fits that ancestral guidance. So this assessing shapes judgment, a moral ground, ethics, and long-term planning. So together, these mechanisms explain how ancestral spirituality actually takes place. So the last contribution is that this paper challenges taking for granted assumptions in entrepreneurship that we should always focus on the future, let's say. However, for these entrepreneurs, the past is not only a constraint or a nostalgic backdrop, it's an active resource and a guide to move forward. So I guess the contribution is that I try to shed new insights on what we mean by opportunity, success, and time orientation in entrepreneurship. Giving this simple typology, recalling, engaging, assessing on ancestral spiritual calling, I try to clearly state who or what is the caller, who is calling them to do things. So they are their ancestors. What does this calling mean in practice and who this calling serves? Okay. I guess this empirical typology is a good starting point to better understand the motivations among indigenous entrepreneurs with a strong spiritual salience. Those would be the main contributions.
What was for you the main theoretical or maybe methodological challenge or challenges in addressing such a question?
I guess that there were two main challenges. First of all, the first one was conceptual. The idea of a vocational calling comes from Western traditions, going as far as Max Weber and such. I had to be very careful not to impose that framework on Mapuche experiences. So I guess the job in that regard was a bit tricky for me to respect how Mapuche entrepreneurs describe their lives and find ways to represent their voices without overimposing our frameworks or flattening their accounts into our terms. I don't know. So that meant slowing down a lot, trying to listening differently and letting this concept of ancestral calling emerge from the data itself. So that was the first main challenge. The second one was methodological because I was reusing data I had already collected for my PhD, but I hadn't originally set to use it to study ancestral calling. This pattern or concept or idea, I don't know, revealed itself after several readings, iterations, recoding, and discussions. So it required a lot of patience, many writing, rewriting, and having wonderful discussions with many colleagues to test whether or not this was robust, really emerged from my gatherings, or was just, I don't know, wishful thinking. In such a regard, I'm very grateful to all the colleagues who put back and helped me sharpen this analysis. And on a practical level, this kind of exploratory qualitative work is very messy and non-linear. We're always reading qualitative exploratory studies, and when they describe the methods, it all seems very straightforward. But it is very different how you do research to how you report it. So when doing it, you don't have a recipe or a clear path from question to method to result. There's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of messiness, okay? So that's why I guess this process took quite some time, 3 years, as I was telling you. And it taught me a lot about conducting exploratory qualitative research. And it also told me a lot about acknowledging my own limits, my biases, and shortcomings. Yeah, those were the main challenges.
During your research journey, what was your biggest surprise or maybe the most counterintuitive result?
I guess the most striking insight was how strongly the past became the engine for what looks like forward movement. Okay. So conventional common knowledge in entrepreneurship assumes people to look ahead, imagine a different future, and try to bring it into being. But with many of the Mapuche entrepreneurs I work with, the path to the future ran through the past in some ways. So I'll try to articulate this more clearly. In early stages of venture development, when entrepreneurs are searching for ideas, instead of scanning markets for gaps or thinking about new trends, many describe a process of recalling. They're deliberately reconnecting with old practice, stories, traditional ecological knowledge, etc. These memories were insights or serve as guidelines or blueprints. Okay. So when moving to actual entrepreneurial action, they adapted those practices and those memories into present day ventures, let's say. So they ended up with products or outcomes that honors their ancestry while allowing them to, I don't know, earn an income, grow their businesses, and keep moving forward. So the counterintuitive thing was not that they were backward looking. It was that being backward looking was a pathway to creating a better future, a more positive, meaningful, worthy future in their own terms. So I think that defies a lot of assumptions. It also helps to explain why their measure of success often includes cultural continuity, land care, and intergenerational well-being, not not just sales or profits, disregarding or dismissing what has come before. So what has come before matters. I don't know, it gives meaning, it gives shape to their behavior and to the ventures themselves. So that's the main counterintuitive insight that I found.
What are the main implications of your work for entrepreneurs, managers, policymakers, practitioners in general?
Thank you, Vincent. I guess there are a few implications I'd like to highlight, especially for colleagues, makers working or planning to work with indigenous entrepreneurs. First, viewing heritage as a resource. Okay. So, as I was telling you, I think traditional ecological knowledge and ancestral practices can be like actual assets for indigenous entrepreneur. They can inspire products and sustainable ways of doing business. So when working with indigenous entrepreneurs, don't assume that profit is the only driver. Okay. So for example, policies that protect the land, value traditional knowledge, or support community-led business models can often be more successful and produce better outcomes for indigenous entrepreneurs. So I guess broaden our success metrics and KPIs is paramount beyond just term profit as the only measure of success. That's the uh, that would be the first main implication. The second one is to design support that accept longer time horizons and okay. So indigenous entrepreneurs with a strong spiritual salience often need quite some time to revive this practice, bring them into the world and build trust with other stakeholders. Third, grant cycles and pressures to scale fast, I don't think will do it. Okay. They can do more harm than good. flexible funding, patient capital support are needed. So in relation to this, I think it's key to balance conservation with openness. So even though an ancestral calling can strengthen identity and sustainability and very positive things, it could also lead in some cases, I guess, to less openness to new knowledge and new ways of doing things. So I guess support programs should aim for spaces for a sweet spot where respect for heritage and responsible innovation meet, I don't know, for example, co-design workshops with elders or something like that. I guess those kind of things can make a difference, but you need to be aware of these trade-offs. On ancestral calling can empower indigenous entrepreneurs, but it could eventually, I don't know, limit openness to some kind of new knowledge. So I guess it's not that simple nor straightforward. And finally, being mindful of change, I guess it's relevant. That's the last implication of this study. This ancestral calling I found is not an anti, but instead it's change framed by continuity and tradition. In short, we should be shifting the question from how do we make more profit to how do we make profit by honoring the past and serving future generations. Okay. So this intergenerational wealth creation approach it was relevant for the people I engage with. So those are the main implications of this study.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian, for participating to our show and presenting your paper entitled Summons from the Past, Spiritual Calling in Indigenous Entrepreneurship. All our podcasts are available on entrepreneurship-early.com and on the main podcast platforms.
Thank you very much, Vincent.